Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Federal. A quick 3-day confrontation between India and Pakistan has ended in a ceasefire. The Prime Minister, in his broadcast to the nation, has said that India agreed to ceasefire following Pakistan saying that it won't indulge in any sort of terror activities or military audacity further. This runs contrary to President Donald Trump's assertion that his deputy J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio literally burned the midnight oil to put together a plan of reconciliation. Many believe Trump, being Trump, has made such a statement, but rather than taking up diplomatic snafu, we'll be discussing here India's air power, which perhaps forced Pakistan to propose a ceasefire. I'm joined by a very special guest, Air Vice Marshal Arjun Subramaniam, uh, retired, to discuss the issue and more. He's a fighter pilot, military historian, air power analyst, and strategic commentator. Welcome, Air Marshal.
Thank you,
My
Sri, for having me on the show.
Yeah, my first question is, our Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri has said it was Pakistan's DGMO who called up his Indian counterpart to propose a ceasefire. Earlier, the Indian military briefings outlined the immense pressure the forces exerted on Pakistan by destroying its air defense system and airport infrastructure. How do you assess Operation Sindoor, and do you think it was able to achieve its objectives?
Look, what you talked about is absolutely right when you asked whether Operation Sindoor managed to achieve its operational objectives or its objectives. I'm glad you didn't talk about victory or defeat, because in contemporary conflict, talking about victory and defeat is completely, an outdated concept. Today we
Right.
talk about strategic outcomes and we talk about strategic objectives. And Prime Minister Modi, and as well the DG Air Ops, if you recollect, constantly reiterated the fact that our fight here was neither with the Pakistan military nor was it with the Pakistani people. It was with the terrorist establishment that was embedded within Pakistan's landscape, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, we had to do something to restore deterrence. And I think what this acknowledged also was that our past attempts at deterrence, through the means that we adopted, had proved to be suboptimal. And that now we needed to climb the escalatory ladder in order to re-establish deterrence. And the methodology and instrument that we used to do that principally was air power. Though, to be very honest, and like the CDS and like all the spokesperson have reiterated, that it was a joint operation, but this joint operation was predominantly executed through the medium of air, either air launched missiles or surface to surface missiles. And in that
Yeah.
way, it has opened up a completely new paradigm of conflict in the Indian landscape, which is led by air power in
Right.
what has predominantly been a ground centric or a land centric security establishment.
Yeah, we'll come to that. But do you think the objectives were met? Because why I'm asking this question is there's another point which PM said. He enunciated a kind of his terror doctrine in 3 points. He said India will strike back on terrorists and their protectors and will not be deterred by any nuclear blackmail. These are three things he said. Now, do you think this should now act as a deterrent against future attacks?
You see, to be very honest, I'm a realist. And to expect the terror network in Pakistan, led by the Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed, to get cowed down completely or completely dismantle its network based on these set of strikes is wishful thinking. And
Right.
therefore, if India wants to stay the course, right, it has to demonstrate its willingness to strike should there be complicit behavior from the Pakistani state and the terrorist network in the future. How long
Yeah.
this deterrence is going to last is anybody's guess.
Right.
But what Prime Minister Modi has rightly articulated, that should we able to get sufficient evidence that future terrorist strikes have been supported by the Pakistani state, then it would be tantamount to being an act of war, and that we would
Right.
reserve the right to strike at a time and place of our choosing.
Right. You're right. Even today, we heard morning papers. There was there was an attempt. There was a terror strike, but of course, minor in nature. We are talking of the bigger ones, like that happened in Pulwama. So whether those kind of things we can expect, since we have climbed up the escalation ladder, uh, it could prove some kind of deterrence. Also, the nuclear threat, which was constantly posed, whether these two things have been made very clear that India is not going to be deterred by these kind of things.
Look, the nuclear. Look, we are talking about two completely different countries. On the one hand, we are talking about a nuclear armed state, which is Pakistan, which is almost on the verge of bankruptcy and which is almost on the verge of being considered by several constituencies in the world or across the globe as being a rogue state. Uh,
Right.
or on the brink of being termed as a rogue state or a state sponsor of terror. Now, will such a state act as a responsible nuclear power in the future? I don't know. And
Hmm.
when I say I don't know, it means that the threat of the nuclear, uh, I would call it nuclear blackmail, but the threat of nuclear escalation will continue to exist. And
Okay.
how the Indian
Hmm.
strategic establishment decides to deal with it is something that the days and months ahead will reveal to us. And when I say that, that if we want to say that, look, we are not going to be deterred by Pakistan's threat of nuclear blackmail, then maybe something needs to be done. And I don't know really what, I can't spell it out, but something needs to be done to our nuclear doctrine to be able to quickly climb that escalation ladder should a threat of nuclear blackmail be offered.
Okay. Now I'll turn to another question. Since the skirmish is over,
Yeah.
how do you assess the performance of Indian Air Force? Well, both its offensive posture on day one, where it attacked the terrorist camp across the border, and its defensive action where it managed to protect its military assets and civilian lives on day two and day three. Day two and day three, you saw a very different picture. Day
Absolutely.
one, we went on. So, how do you see both the offensive and the defensive posture? This I'm asking in the context of whether IF managed to demonstrate its kind of air superiority. Did we have that? And did we manage to integrate effectively our platform, sensors, weapon system, all of that?
So, uh, uh, to answer your first question, did the Indian Air Force enjoy complete air superiority? No, it did not.
Yeah. Mm.
Pakistan is considered to be a peer air force, and therefore, in an air force engagement of the kinds that India and Pakistan have traditionally engaged in, uh, expecting air superiority in the classical sense is a very, very difficult proposition. So, did
Mm.
the Indian Air Force enjoy air superiority? No, it did not. But within the umbrella but what it certainly established was a significant favorable air situation along the entire western border, which means to say that despite opposition from the Pakistani Air Force, despite the Pakistani Air Force, I'm not too sure about the finer details, but I'm sure the Pakistani Air Force would have got airborne in large numbers in order to provide air defense. Even in such an environment, that the Indian Air Force managed to conduct such widespread offensive strikes is a testimony to the flexibility and resilience of the Air Force for having created and maintained a favorable air situation that made it possible for it to conduct strikes from possibly its own side of the borders or
Yeah.
with minor ingressions.
Yeah,
The same,
maybe yeah. So maybe I'm asking this question a bit early, but then still I would like to get an answer from you. You know, I'm sure there was an element of surprise in Indian strike on day one. I mean, I don't
absolutely,
think there was an
absolutely,
element
and
of, but
no,
but how do
not
you?
an element, not an element.
Yeah,
There was an element of complete surprise.
complete surprise. So, but how do you think the Pakistani Air Force responded to that? Because I mean, the reaction time, the claims of deterrence from that side,
Yeah,
are there. Though there are telltale signs of how India managed to destroy their camps, but
yeah, yeah,
if you
yeah,
look across, they did manage to respond.
yeah. So here is the thing that look, from the time the Pahalgam massacre occurred, it was almost a foregone conclusion that India would respond, right? And therefore, from that time onwards, I'm sure Pakistan's armed forces would have their state of alert would have significantly increased, right? And when I talk about the Air Force, what the significantly increased alert means, that there would have been combat air patrols, there would have been air defense readiness almost round the clock. So even within that readiness environment,
Yeah.
that the Indian Air Force managed to conduct a surprise attack is tantamount, or demonstrates the significant amount of learning that the Indian Air Force has gone through after Balakot, right?
Yeah.
And the strikes were extremely effective. I mean, to say, the pinpoint accuracy, wide scale attacks, and it's not just the Air Force. I'm given to understand that even the Indian Army responded with its drones and its surface to surface missiles at some of the targets that were closer to the line of actual control. So yes, despite some alert status from within the Pakistani environment, yet the Indian Air Force managed to surprise the adversary, which is extremely creditable. And you talked about offensive and defensive operations. So the offensive operations were conducted on 2 days. One day was
Right.
the night of 7th and 8th, and the other widespread offensive operations were conducted on the morning of 10th.
Yeah.
And it
Third
is
day.
the
Yeah.
yeah, it is the second round of offensive operations that actually broke the Pakistani morale and broke their back in order to approach for a ceasefire. That
Yeah.
is
I
the
think when they attacked the infrastructure, airport infrastructure, and air defense systems, I think these two
Absolutely,
really.
and it was done so wildly. I am in the days to come. I am going to do some kind of a quantitative analysis, but as a military historian, at first sight, it appears that the amount of damage and the widespread strikes that were conducted right from the south to the north in Pakistan could have probably equaled the number of or the kind of attacks that were conducted entirely during the 1971 war.
Okay. So I can only imagine from various news reports which I've been
Yeah.
looking here and there, and apparently on day one, it was a very much should have been a very coordinated effort. A number of aircraft with a mix of platforms from
Yes.
our side must have engaged before their response come in the 20 minutes of action. It's only 20 minutes. When those 20 minutes, I'm sure a number of things happened, which is kind of a historian like you would rather unravel later. But what you could say currently at present, what could you tell us about that? What kind of skirmish would have happened in those 20 minutes? I'm not asking you to say how many number of aircrafts are involved, what kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
action.
Yeah.
If you can just give me to
No,
our viewers, what kind of action might have happened?
just to give a sense, that there would have been several dozen aircraft involved from both sides, stretching right from the north to the south. And when I talk about north to the south, so the northern fringes of this aerial engagement could be construed across the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir, which is Abim, the Pakistani capital of Islamabad.
Right.
And the southern portion can be considered to be the northern portions of the desert sector, Bahawalpur, Lahore, and those areas. Now, both Pakistan and the Indian Air Force have several airfields on both sides across that entire sector. So you can imagine that uh, these kind of strike missions or these kind of offensive missions cannot go alone. Will
Right.
not will not get airborne alone. When they get airborne, they will get airborne with airborne warning control systems, AWACS aircraft. They will get warning. They will get airborne with air defense aircraft. They will get airborne with electronic warfare aircraft. And so this
Yeah.
entire mix of aircraft is called a package. So
Right.
there would be several packages of aircraft right from the north to the south that could have got airborne. And seeing this happen all of a sudden on the radar, I'm sure the Pakistanis would have scrambled several aircraft from several airfields.
Hmm.
So by the
Right.
end of 20 minutes or the end of 25 minutes, what would have matched up, like I told you, is several dozen aircraft on both sides constantly conducting what they would call engagement with one another, offensive, defensive operations, all of it taking place at speeds of 750 to 900 kilometers per hour,
Right.
trying to get the other person within the kill zone of their respective missiles.
And
While
without
and
crossing the airspace.
exactly without crossing the line of control.
Yeah. So they
That would
remain
have
within the airspace, and maybe they have actually, because the speeds are so high, Mach
yeah
2, 3, so they must
no
have
not
gone back and forth.
exactly, you got it you got it absolutely right. So they would have gone back and forth, and so it's like an aerial ballet going on in the air.
Right. Hmm.
It's like an
So,
aerial skirmish going on in the air, comprising of many dozen aircraft,
right.
many dozens of aircraft.
There are a lot of news reports, some of them pretty credible, both in domestic and overseas media, are suggesting that India might have lost some aircraft. Most importantly, Rafale. How
Yeah.
do you approach these apprehensions? The DG Air Ops remained tight-lipped on aircraft
Yeah.
losses, but he did say that there were some combat losses on the Indian side too, but all the fighter pilots were back home. So, how do you see this? Because in
Look,
this kind
I
of
see this. I
confrontation,
see this
yeah,
currently. I see this currently in the realm of possibility and speculation.
right,
Right. And
right,
similarly, there are reports on the other side that there were two JF-17s that were shot down, and F-16 that were shot down, and AWACS that were shot down. So,
correct.
so in the current environment of both sides, still attempting to carry out an evaluation of possible gains and losses, I think it would be too early for us to speculate on possible losses. But what I can say is that the Rafale and the Su-30 were big players in the entire game of offensive operations that took place.
Right. So, so here I would like to ask you further that, uh, do you think Pakistan managed to shape its communication, rather focusing on Rafale versus J-10C and
No,
PL-15
no,
missiles?
no, I
Because,
don't think.
yeah, because there are a lot more discussion
No,
on
I don't
this.
think so. In a situation of significant asymmetry, which
Right,
started coming out after day one, it is but natural for the Pakistanis to concentrate on a narrative that suits it. Some amount of credibility, or some amount of saving face to its own public, and that narrative emerged from a Rafale versus J-10 and PL-15 kind of a scenario. So I think it is entirely expected of the Pakistani establishment to create these media. And for example, I've seen several videos put together by Western analysts also. Even
right,
they are not able to put their clear finger on what have been the losses on both sides, and
right.
that this and that there have been several PL-15 missiles found on our side of the border that have misfired.
Right.
So
So,
so
so
it's
is
again,
it
it's too early
because,
to.
yeah? Hmm. Sorry, please go on. Yeah,
No,
sorry.
tell me.
No, I was asking,
No,
is
no,
it
no.
possible that
Go ahead. Go
the
ahead.
Western defense industry, is this perhaps this conflict where ended up in a comparative efficacy of the two aircraft, because perhaps satisfying the curiosity of the Western defense industry, taking the spotlight away from the evidences offered by India on the state-sponsored terrorism. Did it happen to some extent that here we are trying to say that, look, we
Uh,
have only stuck at terror spots, and these are the guys who are offering training grounds. And even we gave evidence of how Pak armed forces officers are offering their last respects to kill terrorists. When we are talking about all this, but the narrative seemed to have been more between these two. Is it because also the Western, the defense industry is more keen on studying how this conflict happened between a Chinese aircraft and a French, Russian, Western-made aircraft?
So that is their prerogative, and there could be a sense of truth, or there could be an element of truth in what you are saying. But that doesn't really worry India at all. From whatever statements have emerged from Delhi or from South Bloc, it doesn't worry. See, I'll tell you. Let's look at the big picture. The big picture was that the Indian government, led by Prime Minister Modi, decided on a course of action that was that was risky. It was fraught with tremendous amount of risk, but the payoffs were very high. And when you adopt a risky course of action with high payoffs, you should also be prepared for bearing some losses in order to allow those
Right.
courses of action to play out fully, right? So in the final analysis, the kind of damage inflicted by the Indian Air Force on various constituencies of the Pakistan military has been absolutely staggering, to say the least.
Mm.
And that
Okay.
is the narrative that will actually play out over the next few days. The Rafale and J-10 argument will fizzle out in no time. It
Right.
will fizzle out.
Right.
But the argument that will come to the forefront is what are the various areas in which the Indian Air Force has performed in such a way that it has delivered strategic outcomes.
Yeah. So one is of course, the performance of the Indian Air Force that you very clearly explained. But on the other side, why I'm coming back to this question, because you earlier said Pakistan is a rogue state, but the whole and we kind of thought that we have moved away far from being bracketed with Pakistan for everything.
Yeah.
But then the way this whole thing has happened, the diplomatic announcement finally, when the ceasefire is called, where it was probably the narrative which came from specifically from US.
Mhm.
Uh, have they forgotten for a moment that it is that state where they discovered Osama bin Laden in the backyard? I mean, have we not managed to stress enough on the West and the US that look, uh, Pakistan is what Pakistan is?
So, I don't know whether you read Nirupama Subramaniam's piece today, in which in which she suggests your argument, saying that in all this, have we managed to get ourselves hyphenated with Pakistan again?
Right. I
The
didn't read it
answer
yet.
is
Okay. Mm.
okay. Okay.
Sorry.
The thing is that uh, if there are two countries that have walked back from the brink after a fierce skirmish for at least 3 days, for some time, obviously, both the countries would be hyphenated together and be seen as part of a larger problem that needs to be solved, right? But
Yeah.
the moment the dust settles down, I think Indian diplomacy and Indian statecraft is quite firm and strong enough to signal to the world that look, this is not as much about India and Pakistan as it is about India and terror.
Right.
And therefore there is no question of putting India and Pakistan on the same platform by any yardstick, by any metrics. And that is the narrative I think that we will gradually get back onto the table within a matter of weeks or months. I'm certain about that.
Okay. Now I'll bring you to another aspect. In 2020, in a war of research paper, you have said that that was in the context of China. You have
Yeah,
postulated that air power could emerge as a key element in the future.
yeah.
But do you think it has already happened, though it's a different theater, through usage of Chinese equipment in this short skirmish? China may not be there directly, but then its weapon system versus what we had, our platform. Has it in a way already happened?
Oh yes,
Do you see
absolutely.
that?
Oh, it's happened, and I think I think I'm so glad I wrote that paper, because I have been convinced in my mind for many years that in contemporary conflict, air power has to lead the way. Air power has to lead the way if you want to, if you want to take short and swift conflicts to their logical outcomes.
Right.
Because the moment you start pitting force against force on the ground, you are then condemned to just foot slog for days and days together before achieving any kind of outcome. But the moment you start causing heavy attrition from the air, not only is it damage on the ground, but it is also a severe dent to the adversary's morale and psychological profile. So I think it's already happened. And both India and China know that any future skirmish along the line of actual control may bring in air power in a big way.
Hmm.
And I think both India and China will be looking very carefully at equipment and lessons drawn from this particular conflict, because China must be extremely happy to have tested and proved
Correct.
and proved its weapons one way or the other in the conflict against India. And India, on the
Exactly.
other hand, would be pretty happy that it has got a chance to pit itself against Chinese weapons.
Yeah.
I think both India and China would come away from this conflict with certain big lessons to take away.
But in that context, I would ask a question. Is it, it wasn't a full-fledged uh, war. It was
Yes.
actually building up to that. So, but in this conflict, was basically not necessarily against, it started against a terror group, not against an army. Have we kind of suboptimally used our forces and kind of exposed what we have done to the others, as others would be all studying this particular conflict, or the
No,
communication, the kind of the strategy and other things?
I think one of the perils, or one of the lessons as a historian I can give from the recent past, is that countries have been quick into enter conflicts but have been late to disengage.
Hmm.
I think so. In the context of the lessons learned from recent conflicts, whether it is Iraq, whether it is Afghanistan, whether it is Russia, Ukraine, whether it is Israel, Gaza, every stronger power has gone into a conflict with misplaced notions of victory and when they can get out. Now,
Right.
in that context, I think the decision to de-escalate after 3.5 days was a I would say very timely decision by India. And I
Right.
do not subscribe to the views of the few hawkish elements that are there within our strategic environment that say that maybe we should have continued for a few more days to give Pakistan a bloodier nose. I
Right.
think those series of strikes on the 10th was enough to give them a bloody nose.
Right. So are we now convinced that our Indians, our defense planners have kind of moved away from the land force centric mindset, as you said earlier? Because had this proved that the what it has proved is perhaps in the Pakistani theater, but moving to the other one, are we still in that, or we need to do a lot more? What is your assessment?
No, look, I'm quite clear in the sense I'm quite certain that I don't think any one template can be
Right.
superimposed onto another template. So I do not think that any future short, limited, but high intensity conflict with China will only restrict itself to the aerial domain.
Okay.
Given the uncertainty or the poorly demarcated line of actual control, I think if there is a short, limited, high altitude conflict with our northern adversary, I think it will be both in the land and the aerial domain. Which means to say that we will have to learn a lot of lessons from the current conflict and improve and further improve our integration and synergy between all the three services.
Right. So also, I mean, I would like to kind of seek your views. A final question here: that in the three-day conflict, it seems to have indicated a new kind of warfare, where both sides use their aerial assets. As you said earlier, we had sent in missiles, drones, and UAV without crossing our own airspaces. I mean, is it going to be the future of conflicts where air power dominates over other branches? Is it a kind of a new normal emerging now? Now,
See,
here we were on the airspace, maybe the platforms from the sea. Is it now going to be the new kind of
yeah,
action theater now?
so I think every conflict can be divided into phases, right? I think the current conflict ended with phase one, right?
Right.
So phase one in any future conflict is likely to commence with offensive or defensive action in the aerial domain. And if a conflict prolongs further than phase one, that is when I think both land and naval assets will come into play.
Right.
And for that
Right.
matter, even naval assets, should they
Hmm.
be put into play, they would initially come into action once again through the aerial domain, through long range
Right.
missiles, through long range vectors. So,
Yeah.
yes, at least in the beginning of any foreseeable future conflict, I think the first mover advantage will be through the medium of air.
Yeah, that's what I meant, using these platforms on the sea. I think we saw that during the Gulf War also,
Yeah,
because it was all aerial combat when they attacked Iraq. They divided Iraq into two, the parallel lines they drew, and then for a number of days it was only aerial bombing.
yeah,
You
yeah,
couldn't see boots on the ground for very, very many days.
absolutely,
So,
absolutely.
but then we have gone a step forward after Ukraine war. Now we're seeing a lot of drones and UAVs and other things. So
But there's one last
seems
point
to
I wanted to make. There's one last point
yeah.
I wanted to make. After the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the to and fro conflict between the Hezbollah and Israel and things like that, there was a lot of froth that came into the public domain about the efficacy of unmanned aerial vehicles and drones,
Hmm.
right? And now that blind faith in the ability of unmanned aerial vehicles and drones to cause damage to the adversary has been punctured in the India Pakistan conflict of 3 days.
Right.
And that is because I think India understood the concept of aerial denial by
Hmm.
putting into place a very, very robust and multi layered air defense system.
Right,
So,
but yeah, but is it? I mean, the other view is they perhaps are testing your, you know, your durability by sending cheap, quadcopters, and you were using far more
so,
expensive devices to solve them.
so that comes to the fact that you are now testing the resilience of a far more powerful state.
Right.
So how long more? Even let us assume that Pakistan had, for all you know, Pakistan has exhausted its entire stock of unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, and quadcopters,
Hmm.
or almost exhausted its entire inventory of these platforms.
Right. Yeah.
So
Hmm.
I have always, in all my writings, I have suggested that please do not blindly go on a completely UAV based offensive aerial strategy. You
Right.
have to you have to you have to have a balanced offensive aerial strategy that combines the use of unmanned combat aerial vehicles and manned aircraft and missiles.
Right.
It is a holistic combination that would be most suitable to modern warfare.
Right. Uh, Air Marshal Subramaniam, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I think you clarified a lot of issues and gave a lot of perspective on how this particular confrontation might have happened, and also give a broader perspective of what might happen in the days to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Srinivasan, for having me over. And I think it's important for viewers to understand the nature and the character of contemporary warfare. And I think the air war in this short 3 day skirmish will offer a lot of lessons for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Bye.